I think a lot of times you can sort of tell what's going on in somebody's theory of something by asking, well, what is it that they fear most or think you should fear most? And as I hear you talk about ambition, I think of the community in which I was raised, and I think they were more afraid of ambition than of a wrong kind of humility. So it was worse to be overreaching in your ambition than to be underreaching in your humility. I wonder, would you suggest going the opposite direction?
Well, I can tell you what I'm most afraid of. I'm afraid Tocqueville is right. That what liberal democracy tends to are two overwhelming facts that I see more and more in our culture. One is the tendency to a paternalistic state that monitors your security and takes care of your choices in some comprehensive way. It's not tyrannical in the sense that it doesn't sort of boss you around, but it has an interest in safeguarding the terms of your choice. So you have, on the one hand, this massive tendency to statism at the top. At the same time, you have a massive tendency to social atomization at the bottom. That the promise of liberal democracy is that you're going to be free to choose apart from tradition and apart from religious constraints and apart from authority. And if you're going to act on that, what you have to do is disentangle yourself from any constraint, any authority that would limit your ability to choose to live as you please. And so you're led almost as a natural matter of course to become more and more alone. Those are the two things that I see sort of accelerated in our polity, which is why when Dr. Schindler asked me what I wanted to talk about, I said political ambition, because it seems to be the place where people might be brought up short, where you might say, oh, so I do have a motive for participating in this difficult situation. And the motive I have is actually because it's good for me. It's good for me to flourish this way. And it's good for me to serve my fellow citizens this way. Yeah.
Early on, you quoted the Federalist saying about ambition versus ambition. And I was curious what you would think about the virtue of ambition and whether or not there was virtue in ambition. And how do you secure in a country where our only check is ambition versus ambition that a virtuous ambition arises or gets on top?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I was thinking about this, and I looked up Aquinas on ambition, and he said ambition's always a sin. That's sort of the short answer. That's the short answer. But I think you're getting at something really interesting. On the one hand, and it goes back to at least part of what I was saying at the beginning of the talk. On the one hand, you don't want to become somebody who plays Xbox and eats chips all day, right? You want to have some sense that you are progressing, right? Like Lincoln, his ambition was a little engine that drove him on and on and on, and therefore he walked miles to read the Bible and to do the things he did. On the other hand, that impulse is also a little creepy, right? Because you have literary examples like Jay Gatsby, right? Did you ever read The Great Gatsby? Where he copies out all his ambitions in what is it, Hopalong Cassidy? And the end of the book, he's just as creepy as Tom Buchanan. Because all these ambitions really were all about him. And his love of Daisy was all about him. Right? And so there's this sort of Chinese handcuff effect when you start thinking hard about whether you should be ambitious or not. Is it, I need to be ambitious in order to be great, in order to transcend myself, in order to do something glorious and wonderful for the world. On the other hand, how do I know that this project is really just about serving my ego in a much deeper way, in a much sort of bigger way, right? I mean, I think this is sort of what's in your question. That's a really hard thing to answer. But I think it has something to do with not. Well, let me say this. The way we usually think about this question is we think that there's the way to solve it is by being less selfish, right? That we need to stop being so egotistical and be less selfish. Engage in service projects. And the problem with that is that it's involved in the same question of ego that I've just articulated. What I will say in response is that the Christian life has nothing to do with being less selfish. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with love, right? And that seems to be the only way of breaking the Chinese handcuffs. Falling in love with God, falling in love with each other, and stop and sort of getting over yourself in that way. That seems to be the promise. I don't know who their hand up first over here.
I think that how you divided man into an undetermined nature with determinate ideas. So with determined political ideas. So I assume that determinate political ideas would be more determined than, say, animals.
I'm not sure I said that we had determinate political ideas.
Well, that we have an idea of the good and it is always determined. And then our political ideas fit up to that. I thought you said that.
That we have in politics discrete particular ideas about what might be good to do.
Right.
And we find them compelling.
Right. And so this puts us sort of between ourselves, because we have to, politics goes on in a conversation, but for the politician who wants to be great and not just another one talking in the conversation, he has to have a vision of what the conversation is like. So there's something inherently paradoxical about politics. It's both underdetermined and too determined to really take place at one time. I can't be the king in such a way that I create the state in myself, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the paradox. I mean, I think what I said was you need to be humble enough to ask other people what they think,
right,
and assume that they might be right. In that sense, I'm not saying that there's some necessarily determinate conception of the good at work that you bring to the table. I take it that politics, since it's about conversation and reasoned speech, that it emerges over time and in dialogue with other people. So I think you're over-determining my answer.
Okay. Well, I'll just jump to a question.
Well, I mean, what I do think is right is that when you asked about leadership and you worry that some people of political ambition might be so enamored of their own vision that they're tempted to all sorts of bad things. I think that's exactly right.
Well, I think that if you have to have a vision of the nature of the dialogue, because politics is communal, in order to talk about it, that does put you in this over-determined position. Because I'm both listening to what you're saying, but also since I have a vision for how we will all act, I'm putting you in a higher order, which is sort of in my mind, but also not, because it's capable of endless revision.
Hasn't your mind ever been changed, though? Do we have this experience?
Right.
I mean, I don't go into a political conversation usually thinking that my mind couldn't be changed.
Right. No, I'm not saying that mine couldn't.
Okay. I mean, maybe I'm just not understanding your question. I'm sorry.
Well, okay. So my question is that if there is this problem where in the dialogue of politics we're always talking about the way that we're talking about it because we're forming the dialogue, then doesn't that put ambition in that paradoxical situation? Whereas if I really want the credit of the whole community so that they love me for having remade the state, the only way I can really show it is by pretending that, I was just thinking about what's good for everybody. And actually doing that while at the same time engaging in some sort of political force that reorders things without their goods in mind. So this reminds me of the idea of a stateless state. So what do you think about an anti-materialist or a spiritual communism?
I just don't know. I would just have to think about that one. In terms of in terms of what I take to be the first question, the question of leadership and ambition. This is why Aristotle says that tyranny is the least political form of government, because what you have is basically one person who rules for the sake of their own narrow self-interest and uses everybody else as a means to an end. I hope I didn't give the impression that I was claiming that politics is about thinking about the terms of debate. I mean, part of the problem with the way I've talked about it is the political community simply has to act in history, and so at a certain point the conversation has to stop. Yeah, this lady.
I know you mentioned Mr. Lincoln, so what do you do? I was just wondering, as far as ambition goes, what would you say about our current president? I know there's been so much comparison to like his years nowadays. So I was wondering, like, what would you think as far as his ambition? Really famous ambition.
He's pretty ambitious. Well, I was just talking to Dr. Schiffin about this at dinner. I saw this Frontline show a couple weeks ago about his political career, and I don't know whether I have all the facts right, but at a certain point when he was a community organizer in Chicago, he was a rising star in the Democratic Party, and he was approached by somebody who I think was a state senator, and she was running for Congress. I think this is the way it worked. And so she went to Barack Obama and said, I'm going to run for Congress, and I want you to take my state Senate seat as I run. And he said, great. It's a freebie. So he worked for the nomination, and he got it. In the meantime, she didn't get the nomination of her party for the office. And she went back to him and said, well, I want my seat back. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And there was story after story after story like this of very hard-knuckled Chicago politics. I just don't. I mean, I know that's a huge aspect of his personality. I hope he does a great job. I don't know. I don't have a good sense of his makeup. Apart from that, I know that's there, but I don't know what else is there. And this is a lame answer. He's so new. Yeah, is that
Nora?
Nora? Okay, great.
No, I just wanted to follow up with a little of the question that was just asked. And assuming we all agree that he's very ambitious, is it your sense that his ambition stems from a notion of the good that he's working towards, or is it just a simple desire for egotistical glory?
Well, I don't think you can separate them. I mean, this is part of the claim that I was trying to make in the second part of the talk. You're always trying to be praised for some particular discrete kind of thing, right?
Are you trying to be praised, or are you trying to actually do good and serve others?
Yes. How can you separate those things? How can you separate them? I mean, I just don't think, I think human motivations are so complicated that it's useless to try to say, is he really about doing this, or is he really about doing that?
But it may be the case that some people have more ambition for one than the other.
It could be.
Some people probably want to be praised whether they do the good or not, even in their own mind. They just want to be praised.
Right. But part of my talk, and maybe this goes to Jonathan's question about me being more sanguine. Part of my talk is that there's a real hopefulness in wanting somebody to go up to you and say, "You're a good boy. You are a really good boy." Well, why do you want to be cynical about that? You ever call a little kid a good boy or a good girl? You're just so happy, right? What? That's a deep human impulse to want to be known and loved as good, right?
But to want to be known and loved as good and to want to be known and loved may not necessarily be the same thing.
I don't know. I mean, generally, you love what's good, I just think one way of getting out of this cynical idea we have of our own motivations is to uncover the ways in which they are a profound motivation for something deeper and richer and fuller, right? I mean, ultimately, I connected this with my own beliefs, which is ultimately what you want is for God to love and know you, right? And that's a profoundly good impulse. And so if you say to me, is he really about caring for the country or cynically wanting to be known as good because he cares about the country? I'm going to say, well, I'm not sure I see the point in the question. The real question would be, is he doing something genuinely good? And then you're involved in this. How do you know what's good? Yeah.
Do you see a problem with separation of church and state? There's a lot of fuzzy thinking today about imposing your views on others. And if we're all trying to work for human flourishing, for flourishing of the good in our human existence, I'm having trouble sometimes thinking about political dialogue today with that goal. If that is the goal, if that is our primary goal. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I guess part of the bad news in part two of the talk is that very, very often in politics we impose our views on other people. Because like I said, communities have to act in history. The conversation has to close at some point. People might disagree about who should get married or stem cell research or whatever. And if I'm right that these questions inevitably involve questions of the human good, at a certain point the community is going to have to act, and that's it. So I'm not sure whether you were asking about whether sort of separation of church and state bled over into that question.
Well,
because the response I'm trying to give is politics isn't neutral. Right. We tend to think of politics as a way of clearing space for people to make private choices, I don't think that's adequate to the actual political decisions that a community faces. Yeah.
I'm just confused because when you make a statement like the one you just made, that politics is about clearing space for people to make individual decisions, and then you base a lot of your discussion on a teleological or a telos-driven conception of politics.
Yeah.
I don't understand how those two things can fit together. And I would even say, I wonder how you could arrive at you could start off from the point of criticizing liberal democracy for its lack of telos, basically.
Right.
And come full circle all of a sudden and say that we have this great situation where we can all pursue the good and flourish fully. How do those things fit together?
Well, maybe misunderstood. I mean, what I was trying to say was that I don't think politics can be primarily about clearing a space for individual choice. This is sort of the founding myth of liberal democracy, that somehow you can have a neutral state that acts as an umpire among people who are almost by definition don't have anything in common except their willingness to contract into the system. If you think that's the best way of describing political reality, and I don't think it is, but if you think it is, then you think the government really works best, that works least, that's just an umpire and tries to clear a space for individuals to make their own choices and their own space for bargaining. I guess my problem with that way of thinking about politics is that it thinks about politics in the same way that we think about a retirement account, if you get my meaning. In other words, the way you think about a retirement account is, I don't know what I'm going to be doing at 70, but I know I'm going to be doing something if I'm not dead. And so I know I need a lot of money, right? And so if I store up a lot of money for that period, I'll be able to do whatever I want when the time comes to make a decision. Politics doesn't work that way because communities have to make decisions about substantive matters. Should we go to war with these people? Should we allow these people to marry? Should we let these people in the country? What kind of economic system are we going to have? We don't consistently defer those questions.
But don't you think it's impossible within a liberal democratic system where there's no shared conception of a telos like the one that you described? Isn't it impossible to settle questions like those? Don't we automatically almost default to emotivism?
Well, I guess, I mean, there's a certain way in which you're putting words in my mouth, right? I mean, I didn't say that there was a shared conception of a telos. What I said was that politics is about people coming together with differing notions of what the human good is and trying to figure out, through their reason, how to proceed.
Okay, so
I didn't claim that there was some deep universal agreement.
Do you think that that's possible within a system like the one that we have? Do you think that that's even possible?
If it's not possible, then you don't have politics anymore. And what I said to Dr. Cohenhoven is true. If I'm most afraid of a situation where our lives are increasingly atomistic at the bottom and run by a paternalistic state at the top, that functions, that understands its function as clearing a space for individuals to do their own bargaining, as creating wealth, we don't live in a political community anymore. What you're talking about seems like libertarian freedom, and what I'm saying is it leaves no room for the kind of politics that I'm talking about. Are we moving to a place where increasingly politics is more and more impossible? Precisely because of the kind of freedom that you're talking about, the conception of freedom you're talking about. That's the response that I would put to you. Are we moving towards a bureaucratic, paternalistic, market-driven, apparently democratic state, but a state that has very little politics, actual politics in it?
Shouldn't this be more extreme? Earlier you said Christians, there are good reasons why Christians should get into politics. I would venture to say there are very few fancies in the room. In that case, if our ambition or our Christian notion of the good is sincere, have we any excuse to not be in politics or to not be active in some way?
No, exactly. I mean, and maybe that's the point of my talk.
But then can you say there's such a thing as private ambition? Maybe there isn't a private ambition. If you're ambitious, then it has to be outside of yourself.
Well, what I hope I said was that the way we've handled ambition was to channel it into private life, and that for a Christian that's not acceptable. Even though that's what most of the Christians I know are doing. Somebody, thank you. I want to know your name. Charlie.
I was very, very intrigued and interested by the connection you drew between the desire for beauty and the desire for glory. And I wonder if perhaps one of the reasons that our political structure right now is not encouraging the right kind of ambition, but rather the wrong kind, is, I think that, as you talked about earlier, where it's a state that's designed to get stuck in its own morass and not have things get done, have we perhaps created a political climate that isn't beautiful? And the fact that the way we look at it doesn't at all inspire in us a sense of awe, but rather a sense of this conversation is absolutely disgusting and I want to go take a nap rather than watch a debate or something. So I wonder if you could comment for a moment if perhaps the lack of a positive aesthetic in our current political environment might be one of the reasons that we're bringing forth this kind of negative ambition.
It could be. It could be. And you can be so overwhelmed by that. I mean, you know, one of the things that I get from students when I give talks like this is why should I do anything? Right? Because what the claim seems to be that this system that we got is so overwhelming that I won't be able to make a difference. I mean, I guess if your point is right, then the response is act beautifully, right? You don't have to be ugly. And sometimes, go figure, people are attracted to honesty and integrity and justice, and you make a difference in their lives. So I don't want to be sort of moralistic and say, yes, we're ugly, we're all ugly, that's the problem. I think the more hopeful response is, well, act beautifully. Yeah.
Do you think that modern media, just how ridiculously, intrusive and there's basically no private life anymore, no chance to make mistakes, no opportunity to do things like that. And also, it's influence. I mean, we saw in this election just how overwhelming its influence can be on getting people votes. I mean, the guy was a rock star. But that aside, do you think it's sort of killing politics as it is? I mean, because it seems to me, and this whole desire for glory, this whole sort of things, how nowadays, like John Stewart was saying, there's no reason to get involved in politics because it's, destroys your life. But, I don't know, I'm curious to say, to hear what you have to say about what kind of effects the media has on it.
I think it provides extraordinarily bad models for civil discourse. I do. And part of my question is whether it's useless to participate in those models of civil discourse. I was asked to be on a really minor cable television show a couple years ago, CN8. They wanted me to talk about religion and politics or something. It was probably hit an audience of 2, and I thought really hard about it. I mean, it would have been fun to be on TV, but I asked about the show's format, and it was one of these talking heads formats, and I just couldn't do it. Because there's no give and take, there's no humility, there's no listening attentively, there seems to be very little respect for other people. And it's depressing, but that's what I think. So turn your TV off. Yeah. One more question? Okay.
Through ambition, keeping ambition in check, could you not say that the result is moderation? And if so, it's moderation, could we not say that that is the good from ambition that we are ultimately searching for?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that I hate our country or our government. I mean, there's something very clever about the way they've managed this problem. Something very clever about it. And if you were an old-time liberal, like I am, who distrusts government, you don't want it to do much. And so when people complain about the government being gridlocked and inactive, my first response is, yes.
In a sense, isn't that perfection in and of itself? Because there's always going to be that ramming heads animalistic tendency. To say that there are certain features of this constitutional regime that I admire and appreciate isn't to say that it's all good news. No. There is a way in which this relentless separation of power that arises out of the suspicion of ambition that we cultivate over time in our regime tends to drive people out of public life into private life. But that's always cured by periods of unrest.
Possibly. But you also have this all the social science data that suggests that people are more and more alone and more isolated and less willing to participate in public life. You ever hear the parallel between the city and the soul in the Republic? I mean, the main point of that parallel is that you can't have a country of moderately decent people. You can't have a moderately decent country without moderately decent citizens participating in it. right? If the way we've structured things drives moderately decent people out of the public realm, and I think increasingly it does, then whatever benefits you're talking about, and I admit there are many, still have these tensions and problems associated with them. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.